computer. And okay, here's our second session here. And I did not finish last week a couple of things on tuning fork tests.
Okay.
There was 2 tuning fork tests that we did not cover, and just because we got squeezed out of time. And speaking of time, we're pinched for time when it comes to this course. I'm told that the last week is the last week of July, and we're already in the second last week of June. So I'm going to be making an executive decision about cutting tinnitus out of this course, because you have it. You will have that in your counseling course, in your oral AURAL rehabilitation course. I believe that's 260.
260.
You're going to be getting that coverage of tinnitus in that course, and so I think I may end up removing tinnitus so that we're able to cover what we need to cover in this course. So, but we're going to cover tympanometry this week and get it done with. We'll talk a bit about acoustic reflexes as well. But the first thing I want to finish from last week is the 2 tuning forks we didn't cover. We covered the Rinne test and the Bing test last week. We did not cover the Weber test, W-E-B-E-R. And if I share screen here, and we'll just go and take a peek at that, I'll just click desktop here and see what happens. Okay, get that, go over to here, see if I can fork. Here we go. Do you see that? Can you see at the bottom of the page here where it says the Weber test?
Mm-hmm.
Now that's based on something called the Stenger effect. The Weber test means that the tuning fork is stuck right in the dead center of the forehead. Sometimes it's put right on the front teeth. And the client is asked to report which ear hears the tone the loudest. Do you hear it louder in the right ear, or do you hear it louder in the left ear? Now, the Stenger effect is really cool. It just means this, and we're going to cover the Stenger test in our last week on pseudo-hypoacusis, which covers malingering, or people lying.
Okay.
Okay, the Stenger test is a way to catch people who are faking hearing loss in one ear. At any rate, the Stenger effect says this. If you hear sound to both ears, if the sound is a little bit louder to one ear, only that ear will hear the tone. Let's say, for example, you have perfectly normal hearing. You can hear down to 0 in both ears. If I put a tone of 50 in your right ear and a tone of 40 in your left ear, you're only going to hear the 50 in the right ear. You won't hear one sound softer and one sounding louder. You'll only hear one. That's the Stenger effect. At any rate, the Weber test is kind of based on that. You put the tuning fork in the middle of the forehead or against the front teeth, and if the guy says it's louder in one ear, then you say, oh, you might have sensory neural loss in your other ear. Your hearing is better in one ear, and you have sensory neural hearing loss in the ear that doesn't hear the tone. But if the client hears the tone in his bad ear, and that bad ear, the tone is louder, then you'd say, you know what, you've got conductive hearing loss in that bad ear. And the very bottom line says the ear with conductive hearing loss, I'm highlighting this, receives input from bone conduction and not from air conduction, so the sound is louder in that bad ear. Now, you may ask me, well, how do you know what's the bad ear or the good ear? And that just shows you that you can't just rely on one test. You'd have to be using the Rinne test and the Bing test in order to tell if you've got conductive hearing loss in one ear. Okay, and then you do the Weber test, and if the sound was heard in the conductive hearing loss ear better than it was in the unaffected ear, then you'd say, yep, that ear is conductive. So don't worry about it. The main thing you need to know is the Weber test is a test that the doctor does by putting the tuning fork in the middle of the forehead and asks the client which ear it sounds loudest in. The dumbest test is at the top here. And it's called the Schwabach test. I'm scrolling up to that one. This test is a qualitative test of bone conduction. The client, the doctor takes the tuning fork and goes thung and puts it on the mastoid bone of the client And when the client no longer hears the tone, the doctor takes the tuning fork and quickly puts it on her own ear.
I always thought that was kind of a weird
It's
test.
what that is. And then counts how many seconds he or she hears it after the client no longer does. And that's to tell the degree of hearing loss. And as we said last week, tuning forks are not good at telling degree of loss. That's why they have hearing instrument practitioners like us, because we have audiometers, and audiometers are calibrated in decibels, which are very good at telling degree of loss. But the big B-U-T, tuning forks are phenomenally good at detecting the type of loss. Okay, so there's your 4 tuning fork tests: the Schwabach, the Bing, the Rene, and the Weber. Okay, done tuning forks. Close this document. Go to tympanometry. And here we are. I'm going to share, so I'm going to keep the screen shared here, and we're going to start on tympanometry. The notes you've got on tympanometry are excessive. Don't freak that you need to memorize those notes, okay? In fact, I'm going to talk to you for this remaining time is strictly from the PowerPoint slides. And then at the very end of today's session, I'll look at the notes with you and highlight what you should know from the notes and what you can ignore.
Okay.
Tympanometry here is shaped like a pup tent. And you can see on the screen here, you've got air pressure on the horizontal axis, and you have compliance of the middle ear on the vertical. Now, we're going to be talking about what's done with tympanometry. You're going to see a couple other pictures here too. Can you see this top right here? That's an acoustic reflex being tested. And the bottom right shows you an ipsilateral acoustic reflex. The top is showing you contralateral acoustic reflex testing. The bottom here is showing you ipsilateral acoustic reflex testing. So we're going to cover all of this, but in a sort of a shallow way. All right? So here we go. Here's a tympanometer, a picture of a typical tympanometer. It's about the size of an audiometer, sometimes a little smaller, and it's got a probe that sticks in the ear. And the probe has got to be airtight. We'll talk about that probe, but let's look at the key concept behind tympanometry. Here's your middle ear. Now read this carefully. The middle ear, for it to be most efficient at passing sound through it, the air pressure has got to be even, Steven, on both sides of the drum. And I'm going to say that again. Look at the eardrum here. Look at the ear canal, and look at the middle ear space. For the middle ear to be most efficient at passing sound through it, air pressure's got to be even, Steven, on both sides of the eardrum. Because the middle ear is a system. And you'll recall from acoustics, all sounds travel through things. And things that they travel through have stiffness, mass, and resistance. Remember that? All right? Mass resonates with low frequencies, stiffness resonates with high frequencies, and resistance is like simple friction. It's the same for all frequencies in any given object. Now, the middle ear, let's look at it as an object. The middle ear doesn't have much mass. Look at the bones, they're the smallest in the body. They'll all fit on a penny. So forget mass. And resistance? Well, the resistance is by these ligaments here. You see these two weird ligaments? That's the resistance of the middle ear. The middle ear is dominated by stiffness. It's all about stiffness. The eardrum is tight, and the middle ear ossicles are tight. So the middle ear system is a stiffness-dominated system. It doesn't like passing low-pitch tones. It's going to resonate with high frequencies. That's the concept of tympanometry, because tympanometry uses a low-pitched tone, and we'll look at that. When air pressure is equal on both sides of the tympanic membrane, here's this blue eardrum, it creates the least stiffness and the most compliance. So the middle ear is a stiff system anyway. Regardless of anything, the middle ear is stiff, okay? But it's least stiff when air pressure is even on both sides of the drum. But either way, it's a stiff system, okay? So when we read what this says, when air pressure is equal on both sides of the tympanic membrane, this creates the least stiffness, and look what else it says, the most compliance. Compliance is just the inverse of stiffness. If something is stiff, it's not very compliant. If something is compliant, it means it's not very stiff, okay? So when air pressure is even on both sides of the drum, sound can more easily get through the drum. Got it? Good. Tympanometry, as we read at the bottom, is really a test of middle ear efficiency. So here's sound coming out of the probe, and it's bouncing off the drum. You know why we use a low pitch tone? Because we want that sound bouncing off the drum. Otherwise, if it goes all through, we've got nothing to measure. So that's why tympanometry uses a low pitched tone. Why? Because the middle ear is a stiffness dominated system, and stiff objects don't like lows getting through. Good, let's use a low pitched tone because we want the sound to bounce off the drum. If it doesn't bounce off the drum, we've got nothing to measure. All right, that's the story of tympanometry. So here's the probe. It's got 3 holes. One's a speaker, you can see here. One's a mic that picks up the sound bouncing off the drum. And the 3rd hole is an air pressure changer. All right, so while the probe pump changes air pressure from positive, look at my cheeks, to negative, okay, you're changing the air pressure in the ear canal, so you know it's got to be airtight. That you got to have a tight seal, otherwise you can't do a tympanogram. The probe receiver, and that's a stupid word, I hate the word receiver, even in hearing aids, it's the speaker. Why they call it a receiver is beyond me. Anyway, the speaker spits out a low-pitched tone, look at this, 226 hertz. And how loud? About 70 decibels SPL. It spits it out, constant. And the mic picks up what bounces off the drum. The mic picks up what bounces off the drum. All the while, the air pressure is changing from positive to room air pressure to negative. Why the low pitch tone? Because the middle ear, as we said, is a stiffness dominated system. The low tone will bounce off the eardrum, off the stiff middle ear system. It's supposed to bounce back. Otherwise, you have nothing to measure. Okay, next slide. This is kind of a weird slide, but just kind of follow me here. Take a look at the ear right in the center and look at the top canal. It's got positive air pressure. The middle ear canal has room air pressure, and the bottom ear canal has negative air pressure, okay? Now look at the top word on the right where it says intensity. Let's say that sound is coming out at 70 decibels SPL, okay, 70 dB. Maybe at positive air pressure, now you're making positive air pressure in the ear canal. So now you're making the air pressure uneven on both sides of the drum, right? It's at room air pressure behind the eardrum, and it's at positive air pressure outside in the ear canal. So now you are really making that middle ear stiff. You're making that middle ear even more stiff than it usually is because now the air pressure is uneven on both sides of the drum. Think of a door. If there's a vacuum behind your door, it's going to be hard to open up the door, isn't it? Because there's air sucking it back or whatever. So that's all I'm talking about here. When the air pressure is uneven, now you've made things, the middle ear system, even more stiff than it usually is. And here's the kicker. The intensity of the sound picked up by the mic is going to be high. In other words, all 70 is going to bounce back. Nothing's getting through. You've made that middle ear so stiff that all of that 70 decibels low-pitched tone is going to bounce right off the drum. So the sound picked up by the mic is high intensity. And look at the top here. Look where my cursor is. High intensity sound picked up by the mic. Now when we make the air pressure even Steven, now we make the air pressure 0 in the ear canal. So now it's equal to the air pressure behind the drum. Well, guess what? That middle ear is still stiff, but it's a little bit less stiff. So you know what? A little bit of that sound is going to go through. A little bit of that 70 is going to go through the drum. So the intensity picked up by the mic will be low, softer intensity, because some of that 70 went through. And then when I make the air pressure negative in the middle ear canal, now we're looking at the bottom ear canal here. Once again, I'm making the air pressure uneven on both sides of the drum. I'm making that middle ear system highly stiff, and once again, a high intensity is bouncing back to the mic. All 70 is bouncing off. Got it? Good. Now look at the bottom right. That means that at negative air pressure, you've got low compliance. At positive air pressure, you have low compliance. In other words, high stiff, lots of stiffness. And the middle ear is least stiff. I have greatest compliance when the air pressure is even Steven. In other words, the middle ear system is least stiff. It's most compliant. And that's the pup tent. So tympanometry consists of 4 tests: the tympanogram, static compliance, physical volume of the ear external auditory meatus, EAM. In other words, that's the physical volume of air, and acoustic reflexes. 1, 2, 3, 4. The tympanogram, static compliance, physical volume, and acoustic reflexes. All 4 of those are done automatically by the tympanometer. You're not doing it, you're just pushing a button. And the tympanogram, it just goes through all these steps. And I'm going to quickly describe what these steps are and the disorders associated with abnormal timps. So here's the slide that talks exactly what we did earlier. Let's read it carefully. On the left. The middle ear is most efficient when air pressure is equal on both sides of the TM. When least probe tone SPL is picked up by the mic, more sound is going through. Got it? Good. Number 3, at this peak, the air pressure behind the tympanic membrane must therefore be the same as that in the outer ear canal. Read it again. Middle ear is most efficient when air pressure is even on both sides of the drum. Number 2, when least of the tone is picked up by the mic, that must mean that the middle ear is least stiff, because some sound is going through. At this peak of compliance, that means the eardrum is least stiff, the air pressure must be therefore equal to the air pressure in the outer ear canal. The air pressure on both sides of the drum must be equal. So now follow the cursor. Positive air pressure, most SPL picked up by the mic. All 70 is bouncing back. You have low compliance. Look at the right corner of the pup tent. It's at the bottom, low compliance. Now make the air pressure 0 in the ear canal. Regular room air pressure. Okay, now look what it says at the top of the pup tent. Least SPL is picked up by the probe mic, because now the middle ear is least stiff. So some of that 70 is going through. Less is being picked up by the mic. And now we're making the air pressure negative in the outer ear canal. Once again, you've made the air pressure uneven. So now, once again, most sound is picked up by the probe mic, and you can say to yourself, you've got low compliance. Your middle ear is very stiff at negative air pressure, very stiff at positive air pressure, meaning you have low compliance at negative air pressure, low compliance at positive air pressure. And at the peak of the pup tent, I've got the highest degree of compliance. I have the least amount of stiffness. And see the peak of the tymp? Is it over the zero? If the peak of the tympanogram is over the zero, that means the air pressure behind the drum is also at zero. Okay? Any questions?
So if it's, okay, so you say if the peak is over the zero.
Yep.
It's, I'm sorry, what did you say?
If the peak of the tympanogram is over the zero, that means that the air pressure behind the eardrum is also zero. Okay? And by what I mean by zero is regular room air pressure. Zero is regular room air pressure. So if the peak of your tympanogram is over regular room air pressure in your ear canal, that means the air pressure behind the eardrum is also regular room air pressure. Wherever the peak of the tympanogram is situated, that's going to be the air pressure behind your drum. That's the neat thing about tympanometry, is you don't even have to go into the middle ear. Just by playing around in the outer ear, you know what's going on in the middle ear without even going there.
What if this was shifted just a little one way or the other?
We're gonna, and that's what we're going to. We're going. You bet. That's exactly where we're going. Here you go. Look at the type A tympanogram. It's a type A because guess what? And the letter A is like a pup tent. Okay, look at the peak. Type A. Where is it? Over zero. Normal. That's what you want. Look at type C. Now, I don't know why they called it type C. A guy named James Jerger named these. He's still living, J-E-R-G-E-R, James Jerger. Huge name in this field, in audiology. Major. I saw him at American Academy of Audiology in Indianapolis a couple months ago. He's retired, but boy, has he ever published a lot. But anyway, here's a type C tympanogram. Look at it. Look where the peak is. It's over negative air pressure. That means that the air pressure behind the eardrum is negative. Because when I have negative air pressure in the ear canal, and my peak of the tympanogram is found there, remember what we said. The middle ear is most efficient when air pressure is even-steven on both sides of the drum. So if the peak of my tympanogram is over negative air pressure in my ear canal, that means the air pressure behind my drum is also negative. That's abnormal. And what pathology is associated with a negative tympanogram? Early otitis media. Kid's got a sore throat, got an earache, the middle ear linings have absorbed oxygen, and swallowing doesn't allow new air to get into the kid's middle ears. His eustachian tubes are not functioning properly. He's got swollen tonsils. So now his middle ear has got negative air pressure. All right? The stages of otitis media, we're going to go through it next week, because next week we're covering outer and middle ear pathologies, disorders, and we're going to be talking about the negative tymps again. So we're crossing this way again next week, but for now, look at here. A type C is associated with early otitis media, meaning that the person has negative air pressure behind the drum. And that's because the eustachian tubes are no longer functioning properly, and when the person swallows, new air can't get up into his middle ears. After a while, that negative air pressure no longer occurs. Now the middle ear, if untreated, begins to exude a fluid. Now the middle ear space begins to be filled with fluid. And that fluid, first of all, is clear, like the skin, like the fluid under a blister. You know when you get a blister and you got that clear fluid underneath? That's called serous fluid, S-E-R-O-U-S, serous fluid. Now, serous fluid is not infectious yet. It's just fluid. And that's what the middle ear produces when it's got a vacuum behind the drum. It begins to react and rebel, and now you're getting a vacuum behind the eardrum, and that vacuum behind the eardrum now turns into a bunch of fluid. The middle ear reacts, produces a bunch of fluid, and look what happens here. The type C is turning into a type B. Do you see that? Now the tympanogram's getting flat, and it no longer has much of a peak at all. And now, what's the next stage of otitis media? Serous fluid turns white. And when it turns white, it's pus, because that's what pus is, infected fluid. So the pus, the middle ear space about the size of a sugar cube, is now filled with pus, and your eardrum, and I'll stop sharing screen, your eardrum is bulged, totally bulged. And when you've got bulged middle ear, you can change the fluid till the cows come home. Ain't nothing gonna happen, because air pressure can't compete with fluid. So I'll share screen again, and this is what happens. Advanced otitis media, look at what you've got, a type B tympanogram. It's flat. So with tympanometry, you can follow the stages of otitis media just like that. Snicker snack, done. You can tell, and that's why people who don't do tympanometry, I think, are silly. Because how long does it take? About 5 or 10 seconds per ear. And look at the data you get. You can back up an air-bone gap. You get an air-bone gap in a child's right ear or someone's right ear, and the person's talking about pain in that right ear. You're suspecting middle ear pathology. Sure enough, you do a tympanogram, boom, backs it up just like that. A stool needs 3 legs to stand on. You can't just use one test. You need to back up tests. That's why the tuning fork cluster of 4 tests is done as a cluster. You never rely on one test. You back things up, always. So, as this slide says, tympanogram progressions at various stages of otitis media. Type A, normal. Type C, early otitis media with negative middle ear pressure. And type B, advanced otitis media with fluid. Cool. Now, I'll see if I can change slides here. Here's the second test. It's called static compliance. Static compliance. Have a read here. Static compliance isn't talking about the type of tymp anymore. Now it's talking about the height of your pup tent. How tall is the pup tent? Is it a short pup tent? Is it a tall one? We're not talking about if it's over negative or positive air pressure. And by the way, BTW, there are not many times when a tympanogram is found over positive air pressure. There's not many times. There's very few pathologies that will result in positive air pressure in the ear canal. The only time you're, or in the middle ear, the only time you're going to get that is if you blow your nose real hard and you know, and you force air up into your middle ears. You might have a temporary positive air pressure in your middle ear, but other than that, okay, tympanograms are found over normal air pressure or over negative air pressure, or they're flat. So now we're going to static compliance. Static compliance, look what it says here. Lots of complicated explanations about it, but basically it refers to the height of the tympanogram. How tall is the tent? Various pathologies affect static compliance. Which ones? Here you go. Static compliance, a type A is a normal tympanogram, once again. A type AD is an abnormally tall tympanogram. It's a stovepipe. It doesn't even reach the top of the screen. It's too big to fit on your monitor. And a type AS is a stiff tympanogram. That's A, stiff. Type A but stiff. AD means disarticulated ossicles. So now the malleus is no longer connected to the incus, or maybe the incus is no longer connected to the stapes or something, because now your middle ear is kind of like, it's abnormally compliant. Okay? And so your tympanogram will be abnormally tall. If you've got otosclerosis, otosclerosis, and we'll talk about that next week too in your middle ear pathology. Otosclerosis is a porous, bony growth around the footplate of the stapes. And it's let's see, I may have a picture of it, but no, I don't. We'll talk about it next week. But it's a porous, soft bone surrounding the footplate of the stapes, and it's hereditary. Have you heard of otosclerosis, Kelly? Has it been covered at all?
Yeah. Yeah, we've covered a little bit of it.
A little bit, and we will more next week too. Otosclerosis results in a type AS tympanogram because now your middle ear system is abnormally stiff. There's nothing wrong with air pressure. You don't have an infection. You don't have negative air pressure. You don't have pus. Basically, you just have an abnormally stiff middle ear system. It's like a car engine that's got no oil in it. Now you got nothing can move. It's stiff. You need oil, but you ain't got any. So your whole middle ear system is abnormally stiff, and so you will have abnormally low compliance. So your pup tent will be squat.
So the middle ear is abnormally stiff?
Yeah, the whole middle ear. Yep. Because that growth of bone around the footplate of the stapes prevents the stapes from moving in and out of the oval window very well. So you've made that whole middle ear system stiff as a board. Okay? And we'll talk again about this next week. We'll be showing you pictures of otosclerosis, actually. The third test, so static compliance is just a number, or it'll just tell you, is it normal, is it abnormal? Some tympanograms will actually have a square like this. Can you see my cursor moving? It'll have a square. And if the tip falls within that square, it's normal. If it doesn't fall within that square, it's abnormal. So your tympanometer does all of this work for you. The third test in tympanometry is physical volume. Now look at the left. You're talking about the volume of air in your ear canal. Look at the right. You've got a hole in the eardrum. When you have a hole in the eardrum, guess what? Now your tympanometer is measuring not only the volume of air but between the probe and the drum, but it's also measuring all the air in your middle ear space. So your physical volume is going to be abnormally large. What's the normal physical volume of a closed ear canal? Well, this ties into your hearing aids. 2cc coupler. Ever heard of that? The reason they call it a 2cc coupler is because 2 cubic centimeters was thought to be the space between your hearing aid and your eardrum. That's the volume of air, about like a sugar cube. Okay? We know now that the volume of air really is a little bit less than 2 cubic centimeters. It's actually closer to 1 to 1.5 cc's. So read up here. Normal physical volume is between 1 and 1.5. A large physical volume might indicate a perforated eardrum. And if you've got a perforated eardrum, you ain't gonna get a tympanogram, because you've got no sound bouncing off that drum. It's all going through the hole in the drum. So what you're going to have is a flat tympanogram. You're going to have a type B if you have a hole in the eardrum. Same with a child who's got tubes in his ears. You won't do a tympanogram. Don't do a tympanogram either. If you see tubes in someone's ears, leave it alone. Don't do tympanometry. If the tubes are blocked, you might force the blocked wax to be pushed into the middle ear, or you might ruin the situation of the tube itself. Leave it alone. Do otoscopy obviously first, but leave tubes alone when you're doing tympanometry. Don't do it. Anyway, if you've got a flat type B tympanogram and it's got a large physical volume, what do you know? You've got a hole in the eardrum. First, you couldn't do a tympanogram because you couldn't find maximum compliance, because you could never make a tight seal because you got a hole in the eardrum. So positive air pressure, it's going to go right through that hole. Negative air pressure, it's going to be sucked right through that hole. You can't do a timp. You're going to have a flat tympanogram. And when you've got a flat tympanogram with an abnormally large physical volume, you know there's a hole in the drum, even if you can't see it. On the other hand, if you've got a type B tympanogram with a normal physical volume, you've got a true type B tympanogram. That's once again highlights the fact that you've got to look at several things at once and don't just rely on one thing to make a finding. Flat tympanogram, check your physical volume. It should read on the readout. It should tell you if it's between 1 to 1.5. If it is, then you have a true type B tympanogram. But let's say you have a type B tympanogram with a tiny physical volume, smaller than normal. It probably means that your probe tip is jammed against the side of your ear canal. Better redo the test. Got it? Good. All right. Physical volume, you can have 3 findings. Normal, too small, too large. If it's too large, you've got a hole in the drum. If it's too small, your probe tube is jammed against the side of your eardrum or your ear canal. Better resituate the probe and do the timp again. Take a breather. Mona, take a break. We got about another 20 minutes or something like that, and we're gonna be good. Now, let's talk acoustic reflexes. The last test done in tympanometry. Acoustic reflexes are ipsilaterally done or contralaterally done. I'll explain them briefly. Have a look at this picture. This guy's having contralateral acoustic reflexes done. The probe is in one ear and a headphone is over the other ear. Okay? What you're doing with acoustic reflexes is really quite cool. With acoustic reflexes, read what this slide says. The acoustic reflex and tympanometry. With acoustic reflexes, you're still using tympanometry. You're still measuring how much of that low-pitched tone bounces off the drum. You're still doing that, but, capital B, but, while tympanometry changes middle ear compliance with air pressures, negative, positive, and room, acoustic reflexes change middle ear compliance by loud sounds. Now you know what the acoustic reflex is from anatomy. You have your stapedius muscle, you have your tensor tympani muscle, right? Stapedius muscle is attached to the neck of the stapes. Tensor tympani muscle is attached to the manubrium of the malleus, right? And what does the acoustic reflex do? And I'll stop sharing my screen a second here. The acoustic reflex tightens the whole middle ear system for a split second. A loud sound, the tensor tympani tightens, the stapedius muscle tightens, and you have now made that stiff middle ear even more stiff. More stiff than it usually is, only you didn't do it with air pressure this time. You didn't do it by making the air pressure uneven on both sides of the drum. No, that's regular tympanometry. Now you're messing around with making the middle ear more stiff, but this time because of the acoustic reflex. Think of the word reflex. Reflex means you had no control over it. Just like when a doctor has you cross your legs and then taps your knee with a hammer and your foot sticks out. Okay, it's a reflex. You can't control that. Put your hand on a hot stove, right away. That's a reflex. Your brain didn't think about it. The message just went up to your brain stem and right back out to your muscles. Acoustic reflex is the same. A loud sound in one ear is going to cause the tightening of the bones in both ears. And the acoustic reflex arc. It's a big circle. It goes from the outer ear, a loud sound in your ear, middle ear, the loud sound activates the cochlea. The cochlea makes a traveling wave. It excites hair cells. Message sent up the 8th nerve to the brain stem. And at the brain stem level, which is simply the spinal cord inside your skull, here's how big your brain stem is. as big as your pinky. That's your brainstem. That's how thick it is. Just so you know. You cut that and you're dead. Anyway, the messages from your ear go to that brain stem, and there's a nucleus there called the superior olive. No, it doesn't have a pimento, but it's an olive. And then it sends messages out to both of those muscles. The fifth facial nerve and the seventh facial nerve go to the stapedius muscle and tensor tympani muscles, and that tightens. So a loud sound causes that acoustic reflex. Fairly clear on that? You covered that at all in anatomy? I think you had some of that or not? I'm not sure.
We had some acoustic reflex.
Some.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Now we'll go back and share screen here, and we'll look at the picture. So this guy, read here, the acoustic reflexes change middle ear compliance by loud sounds. Acoustic reflexes, fourth line down, are done at static compliance at whatever air pressure yielded the tallest tympanogram. If you've got a negative tympanogram, though, you won't get acoustic reflexes. Sorry. So usually it's done at pretty normal air pressures. The acoustic reflex is thus restricted for normal to near normal tympanograms. And why do people test acoustic reflexes? They were looking for eighth nerve tumors. The acoustic reflexes are absent or highly elevated in an eighth nerve tumor. That's one of the main reasons people did acoustic reflexes. There's another.
Elevated, you said? I'm sorry, absent or elevated?
Absent or highly elevated. Acoustic reflexes should kick in at around 85 to anywhere between 85 to 110. That's about the maximum limit of, and acoustic reflexes, by the way, are calibrated in dBHL. So 85 dBHL to 110, 115. They should be in that range, but if they're at the upper edge, that's elevated. 110, 105 is elevated levels, okay? 85, 90, 95 is normal. That's a normal acoustic reflex level. Now, once again, I'm getting this stupid thing that does, here you go. Look what an acoustic reflex does. It causes a temporary reduction in the height of your tympanogram. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Because your middle ear muscles are tightening with the loud sound, and that tightening pulls on the stapedius, pulls on the tensor tympani, or pulls on the manubrium of the malleus, and while the loud sound has occurred, you've got a temporary stiffening of the middle ear chain, of the whole ossicular system. Eardrum, three ossicles are tightened even more than usual. So what have you done? You've increased your stiffness. What have you done? You've reduced your compliance. So read what it says. Here's the dotted line. Reduced static compliance due to acoustic reflex. But remember, that's just temporary. It's just while the loud sound is happening. You get a temporary reduction in the height of your tympanogram. It's not displayed that way, but that's what actually is occurring. So here's your stapedius muscle attached to the neck of the stapes. Here's your tensor tympani muscle attached to the malleus. The acoustic reflex is when both of these muscles tighten. Here's a complicated picture for you. Have a peek at this one here. This is almost like a joke, but look at it just for fun. I'll translate it into English. Loud sound, outer ear canal, eardrum. Loud sound goes through the middle ear, activates the cochlea, goes up the eighth nerve, message goes to the brain stem. Cochlear nucleus is a nucleus there, superior olivary complexes. Remember I told you about the olives? And the red is the message going back out now. This is the fifth nerve, the seventh nerve, pulling on the tensor tympani muscle and stapedius muscle, respectively. So that's the acoustic reflex arc. That's why they call it a loop. The yellow is brain going, afferent. And the red is from brain back out to your ear, efferent. And that's why I wrote afferent in yellow, efferent in red. But looky, when you make a loud sound in one ear, you've got that reflex happening in both ears, not just one ear. And that's the interesting thing about acoustic reflexes. And that's because at the brainstem, you've got crossover. All this crossover taking place, okay? That's why this side of the brain still hears with both ears, and this side of the brain has messages from both ears. I mean, there's so much crossover. Once you enter the brain stem, the proverbial shit hits the fan, if you know what I mean, okay? This is recorded. They're going to love me at OTC. Anyway, so this is the acoustic reflex arc. Contralateral acoustic reflexes were first to be developed. Now check this out. Look at this weird picture. Here's a headphone on a guy's ear. This is a round head. Here's an ear. Here's another ear. Yeah, I'm not an artist. My sisters are artists, but I'm not. But here you go. So here's the guy's face. Here's his ear. He's got a probe in one ear canal and a headphone on his other ear. Now look what the probe is doing. It's the tympanometer probe. Look at the yellow arrows. That's the 226 hertz tone at 70. That's the tone. And ongoing. Now you're not changing air pressure here. What you're doing in the opposite ear, you're adding a loud sound. And when that loud sound is going into the opposite ear, remember, it's going to cause an acoustic reflex in both ears. So the probe ear is going to have a change in the amount of this yellow arrow sound that's bouncing back. A loud sound here is going to cause a change in the amount of sound bouncing back off this guy's drum. Remember, this is that low-pitched tone, 226 hertz, 70 dB SPL. It's ongoing. And in the opposite ear, loud sound. And are you temporarily making the middle ear more stiff? Are you temporarily causing more or all of that 70 dB sound to bounce off the drum? Are you changing, are you increasing the amount of sound bouncing off the drum when you added a loud sound to the opposite ear? Isn't that weird? I mean, talk about a complex test. So you have an ongoing tone, and when I'm adding a loud sound here, I'm temporarily stiffening this middle ear, and this one too, of course, but your probe is measuring here, and you're temporarily increasing the amount of sound that's bouncing back off the drum. That's the acoustic reflex. Cool. Here's the ipsilateral reflex. Look at this. Ipsilateral acoustic reflex. Here's your yellow arrows again. That's your ongoing tone. 226 hertz at 70 dB SPL. Only this time you're adding the loud sound in the same ear. And when you add that loud sound in the same ear, did that increase the amount of yellow arrows that's bouncing back? Did the loud pitch, loud sound change the amount of ongoing 226 hertz tone that's bouncing back? Whoa. Now, I'm stopping for a sec. Why do you have acoustic reflexes? You know, look what pitches the tones are, the loud sounds. They're usually fairly low-pitched tones. They don't use high-frequency sounds for the acoustic reflex. They don't use it. People we used to have to study all of this crap. Like in audiology, we had to learn right ear ipsilateral, right ear contralateral, left ear ipsilateral, left ear contralateral. And then you had to memorize all these patterns of acoustic reflexes. And look at this. This is out of your Martin textbook. I'm
just looking at that.
I get dizzy looking at it myself. It's like, oh my God.
Trying to look at that assignment, yeah.
But we had to memorize this. This was, you know why we had to? Because those were the days before CAT scans. Those were the days before MRIs. They didn't have them. So you're looking for an eighth nerve tumor. You had to do all these different complicated, you had to memorize all these weird patterns. Right ear contralateral, right ear ipsilateral, left ear contralateral, left ear ipsilateral, yikes. And look at all the letters, A, B, all the way down through K. Now look at this. A is normal hearing in both ears. You should have all sets of reflexes, all of them, okay? And then B, conductive hearing loss in one ear. You'll have absent, absent, present, maybe absent. Right ear conductive, both ears, absent, nothing. Right ear normal, cochlear hearing loss, mild to moderate, and it gives you a pattern. And then right ear, cochlear, right and left ear, bilaterally symmetrical, mild to moderate loss. But then you start getting into G and H, and all that. Now you're talking eighth nerve tumors. We don't use acoustic reflexes for this anymore. We now use CAT scans and MRIs. So that's why acoustic reflex testing has faded to some degree, because we no longer rely on them to assess retrocochlear pathology. But look at this. Why do you really have acoustic reflexes? Now we're just into the fun part of this. The difficult stuff is done, okay? Why do you have them? Listen to your own voice. You ever listen to a recording of your own voice? Do you like the way you sound? No. Everybody else thinks that just sounds like you, but you're the only one who hates it. Read what it says here. That's because you are hearing yourself by air conduction only. Air conduction is how other people hear you. That's hearing yourself on a recording. How loud is average conversational speech? 65 dB SPL, 50 to 60 dB HL. Guess what? You hear yourself, read the bottom paragraph, by bone conduction as well, by before Christ, by British Columbia as well. You hear yourself by air and bone. So guess what? You hear yourself louder than other people hear you. You hear yourself, look what it says, around 80 to 85. Guess what? That's enough to cause an acoustic reflex. So why do you have acoustic reflexes? Not to protect against noise-induced hearing loss. That's one of the fallacies we've been led to believe. Not true. You have acoustic reflexes to dull the sound of your own voice while you are talking. That's why you have them. And what sounds cause acoustic reflexes the most? Loud, low-pitched tones. Not loud high pitches, loud low pitched tones. And what's the loudest parts of speech? The low frequency vowels. The low frequencies are the loudest parts of speech. Vowels are the loudest part. Soft high frequency consonants aren't very loud. So what's the loudest part of speech? The low pitches. So that's why acoustic reflexes also are caused more by loud, low-pitched sounds rather than loud, high-pitched sounds. Acoustic reflexes, not to protect against noise-induced hearing loss. That's one of the fallacies we are commonly led to believe. They occur especially while we speak. Note they are the strongest for the low frequencies. Here's a graph showing you how much acoustic reflexes dull the sound. Sounds at around 85, they don't really kick in much. A little bit more, yep, they're starting to kick in. Around 95, yep, they're starting to reduce. If the sound's 100, yep, they're starting to kick in. And the sound's louder, it gets stronger. Louder, it gets stronger. You can see that the effect of the acoustic reflex is mostly for the low frequencies. On a tympanogram, here's what the results will look like. Here's an 80 dB sound, no acoustic reflex. 85, a little acoustic reflex. These dips here, these V's or these U-shaped things are the amount by which the tympanogram went down. That's what that's telling you, okay? That's the reduction in static compliance. It's the reduction of the height of the tympanogram due to the loud sound. And you can see as you're getting 90, 95, 100, you can see now you've got strong acoustic reflexes. That's what the readout often looks like on a tympanogram. That's what it'll look like when you're doing it. Okay, basically, acoustic reflexes are reported in sensation level. And that just means this. Read it. It says they're calibrated in dBHL, but they're reported in sensation level. Read the bottom. Normal hearing and a flat 50 dB sensory neural hearing loss. If it's sensory neural, there's nothing wrong with the middle ear, right? If the loss is sensory neural, there's nothing wrong with the middle ear. So you should have acoustic reflexes. You should. And let's say a normal hearing person and someone with sensory neural loss. They both may have acoustic reflexes at 100. But guess what? The normal one is said to have acoustic reflexes at 100 dB sensation level, because his thresholds are 0 and the reflex kicked in at 100, and the difference between 100 and his thresholds of 0 is 100. So his sensation level is 100. But if the guy with the sensory neural loss of 50, if his acoustic reflexes kick in at 100, well, 100 minus 50 is 50. So his sensation level is less. So, but he still has them. But acoustic reflexes stop occurring once you get past 50 to 60 dB sensory neural loss. If you start entering 70 and 80, you will have absent acoustic reflexes. And the reason why is because acoustic reflexes are all about the inner hair cells. Outer hair cells die first, right? Outer hair cells leave you with about a 50 dB sensory neural hearing loss. Most presbycusis, most noise-induced loss is caused by outer hair cell damage. Most sensory neural loss is mild to moderate, right? That's typical presbycusis, outer hair cell pathology. That person will still have acoustic reflexes because his inner hair cells are still intact. But once the inner hair cells go, now you're going to have absent acoustic reflexes. The inner hair cells are part of that acoustic reflex arc that we talked about earlier. This good old acoustic reflex arc. Here we go. In this picture here, outer hair cells are not involved. Okay, look at the yellow. Loud sounds, outer ear, middle ear, cochlea. And as you're going through the cochlea, you're involved. What's the brain going hair cells? Inners. They send all info to the brain. Without them, you're deaf. Outers just help the inners pick up soft sounds below 50. That's it. So the outer hair cells are not part of the acoustic reflex arc. So if someone's got a mild to moderate loss due to outer hair cell pathology, he or she will still have acoustic reflexes. But if the person has severe hearing loss, then the person sensory neural, then inner hair cells are involved, and you will have absent acoustic reflexes. Have a look here. Oh yeah. So basically, acoustic reflexes, I'll finish with this, and then I'll look at your handout and tell you what to ignore. Okay, but we're on the last slide here. Acoustic reflexes deal with inner hair cells. Here's your inner hair cells. This is why you might want to still do acoustic reflexes today, even if someone's got mild to moderate loss. Look what it says here. If two people, same sensory neural hearing loss, let's say two people with 50 dB hearing loss. One has good speech to scrim, the other one has bad speech to scrim. Chances are the person with the good speech discrimination will still have acoustic reflexes. The person with the poor speech to scrim, his mild to moderate loss might be caused by an even amount of outer and inner hair cell pathology. And so that person will have absent acoustic reflexes. So you can see in a weird way that acoustic reflexes can be used to back up speech discrimination testing. If someone's got poor speech to scrim and a mild to moderate loss, test his acoustic reflexes. Does he have them? Betcha dollars to donuts he doesn't. If the person with good speech to scrim and mild to moderate sensory neural loss, test that guy's acoustic reflexes. Betcha dollars to donuts he's still got acoustic reflexes. They may be at reduced sensation levels, but who cares? You still got them. Conductive hearing loss will have absent reflexes. Okay, because the middle ears are compromised, they will be absent. So to summarize here, here, look at my slide, it's black now. That means we're done. The otitis media, negative tympanogram, absent acoustic reflexes. Otosclerosis, stiff tympanogram, AS, short. It'll be over 0, but it'll be squat, absent acoustic reflexes. Sensory neural loss, normal tympanogram, peak over 0. Nothing wrong with his middle ear. You should have a normal tympanogram. Probably will have acoustic reflexes if the loss is mild to moderate. If the loss is severe, absent acoustic reflexes. Retrocochlear pathology will have absent acoustic reflexes. There you go. We're done tympanometry. I'll share screen and show you what parts of the typed writing you can ignore, and I mean you're going to have most of it. Where are we here? Okay, I'm going to close that puppy. I'm going to pull this one up. Here we go. Share screen. Can you see this here?
Yep.
Good. Okay, looking at all, there's way too much junk on here. What you need to know is that tympanometry came out in the 70s. So this, over here, you'll see a whole bunch of terms. Don't freak about them, but this is sometimes people call tympanometry impedance testing. Sometimes they call it compliance testing. Sometimes they call it blah, 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 whatever. Who cares? Tympanometry, where I'm highlighting, it's a non-behavioral test, meaning that the guy had no choice. I mean, he didn't respond voluntarily. That's the beauty of it. It's a non-behavioral test. Middle ear, we've covered this, is mostly stiffness. It's mostly stiff. Look where it says here, air pressure's got to be even on both sides of the eardrum. This is a key concept. Okay? So, I mean, you can verbally read this, but you know what? When you read this, you're going to hear my voice talking. You're going to hear what we've been talking about. It's really the PowerPoint slides and the concepts we've talked about in this Zoom session. That's what's going to be on your quiz. And by the way, the first quiz covers tuning fork testing and tympanometry. I'll have Lynn Royer upload that so that you guys can write that anytime after today's Zoom session. Okay? I think it's got 10 to 20 questions on it. You're going to think it's so damned easy. Anyway, it tests the efficiency.
Tests are not easy, Dr. Venema.
You'll do fine. You're doing fine.
Tests are not easy.
But you're learning.
Yeah, I'm learning. That's for
sure. You are.
Yeah.
I can't believe how far you've come. I mean, think about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Look at your knowledge base.
If I would have talked to you about this lesson that I was asking you about earlier, I would have been.
Now look at the bottom here where it says tympanometry probe has 3 holes. Okay, we've covered that. You got to have a tight seal. Don't worry about all this jazz on the bottom. Who cares? Don't care about it. Just yeah, right. Blah, blah, blah. All this stuff here. Blah, 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 blah. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Probe mic, well, it measures the sound bouncing off the drum. Blah, blah, blah. Here's your 4 measures that we talked about. So now this just describes the 4 measures. Number 1, types of tympanograms. Named after Jerger, a renowned audiologist. Type A, type AS, type AD, type B, type C. Your static compliance. This describes it for you. Now, look at this in static compliance and ignore all of this stuff. It's all, don't worry about it. It's the height of the pup tent. How tall is the tymp? Is it abnormally small? Is it abnormally tall? That's it. Okay? Scrolling on down, physical volume test. Well, we covered that too. It's all what we did today, blah, blah, blah. And now acoustic reflex testing gets into way too much detail, so freak not out. But look at that. It occurs bilaterally, even though only one ear got stimulated by the loud sound. Blah, blah, blah. SOC, that's just that olive complex in your brainstem. Here's your middle ear muscles, stapedius and tensor tympani. We've discussed that already. So when you read this, you'll look at it and go, oh yeah, that's just summarizing. So just read that. This is just for interest's sake, but here, look at the bottom here. Consider two people, consider two people with mild to moderate loss. One has acoustic reflexes, the other one does not. It's just describing exactly what we talked about at the end of our PowerPoint session, okay? And we're winding on down toward the bottom, clinical testing. Acoustic reflexes are done right after tympanometry. It's done to test for middle ear problems. You're trying to find out at what level do they occur or are they absent. Blah, blah, blah. Here you go. Normal, between 80 to 85. Conductive hearing loss usually has absent acoustic reflexes. You're reading right along with me. Mild to moderate loss should have acoustic reflexes. Okay, still, albeit they'll be at low sensation levels. And then you get to severe sensory neural loss. Usually you'll have absent acoustic reflexes. And then here, retrocochlear pathology, usually absent. And then central auditory pathology, that's up in the brain. If you've got pathology of one of your right or left temporal lobes, you'll still have acoustic reflexes because these aren't involved in the acoustic reflex. The acoustic reflex only goes as high as your brainstem. And then do not worry about any of this stuff down here. It's just describing ipsilateral versus contralateral and blah, blah, blah. But I'm not going to be asking you to differentiate the difference. Okay, and then here you're getting all here's your patterns. Oh God. So don't worry about it. It's just there for your interest. Look at what it says at the bottom. Today we no longer do both sets of them. Today, if you're doing acoustic reflexes, flip a coin. Either do ipsilateral or do contras. Take a pick. Doesn't matter. They used to have all these patterns because we didn't have CAT scans. We didn't have MRIs. So there you have it. Today's topic. I think we got done in an hour, sort of, about an hour and 10, hour and 50, hour and 5, something like that.
That was a lot to cover. So
it's a lot to cover, but believe me, I'm not going to be quizzing someone in detail. Think in broad strokes. Broad strokes. Okay? Besides, when we go into outer ear pathology next week, we are going to be talking about what's going to look normal on the audiogram and what the TIMPs would be. We'll just describe that again. So we keep crossing this way again. I'm wondering, it may be that later on in the semester, like early next month or something, I might do 2 Zoom sessions in a week just to get caught up. I might end up doing that just to make sure we cover our stuff.
Yeah.
We'll make announcements, of course.
Yeah, the other class, I'm in fitting methods, 150. Yep. And that one, usually with Dr. Cluck, you have 2 weeks for each lesson. And this, for summer school, it's 1 week for a lesson. So, you know, it's like we're cramming everything in 8 weeks, what normally would be.
Yeah. So I'm probably gonna cut out tinnitus from this course. Yeah. I don't think we have the time of day to cover it. Next week we'll do outer and middle ear pathology disorders. The week after we'll launch into sensory neural pathology, and we'll probably spend 2 weeks on that one. And then we'll do retrocochlear pathology and we're done. Okay?
Okay.
Thanks for attending. It's always great when someone shows up. It's just so much better than talking into a black empty screen. Anyway, you get out there and take that walk.
Yep, I'm gonna do a walk, and then I'm gonna re-listen to last week's because my notes were really. So I'm gonna re-listen to last week's, and then I'll probably, after this one's posted, re-listen again because I try to write as fast as you talk. But
don't worry about it. If you have any, if you have questions that you don't hesitate to give me a phone call or email me. And my home phone is 778.
778. Okay.
433.
433.
9707.
9707.
Yep. Give me a shout. Anybody, if you have questions, call me. I can answer and tell you way quicker than I check email OTC every day. And I also send out remind stuff very often. But, you know, if you need answers, that's what I'm here for. Let's just make it work.
Okay? Appreciate it.
All right. See you next week. I'll stop recording here if I can. Pause and stop.